This video is made possible by our sponsors, AJA. We'd like to thank AJA for all their support and tell you to go to aja.com for all your production and post-production needs. Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com, or of course follow us on Instagram at filmmaker_u. Every week we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by cinematographer Matteo Landagno, whose work includes Blackout, There Are No Saints, and more recently Radical, just to name a few. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I guess my first question, because I watched Radical, and one of the first things that sort of stood out for me was, for whatever reason, Hollywood's been very adamant that like South America is always that yellow color, and you guys chose a whole different color palette for this, and sort of really, I guess, gave us a new perspective or new view. So, like, when you guys were developing this, how did you guys determine the sort of look for it?
Well, one of the, I think, first decisions that we made with Chris, the director, it was not to fall into that stereotype. I wouldn't say that we also just avoided it intentionally, but it was definitely not something we wanted. We definitely did not want it to look like that filtered kind of tobacco yellow concept of Mexico. We really wanted to have like no filter. We also weren't trying to go a particularly opposite direction either. It was just simply we wanted it to just represent what we see in Mexico, and we were trying to thread this line between not being overly vibrant, which also happens with especially a lot of Mexican films, and just because Mexico is so vibrant naturally, that it's very easy to go vibrant. Like if you saturate things, all of a sudden there's some green wall or some pink wall, and it'll just explode, in saturation. So we did intentionally desaturate a little bit, just because we were trying to not let that be distracting of the story. The story is really about the kids, and we wanted the focus to be there entirely. So, part of it came from stepping away from the stereotype. Part of it came from kind of the natural atmosphere of what we were portraying, and a lot of it came from really not having these things be distracting. We just wanted to kind of come to a middle ground. So again, it wasn't really about going in an opposite way. It was really just trying to leave it kind of unfiltered.
I've been a camera person for 30 years, and I fell in love with cinema. I heard there was free film school in France, and I wanted to get into the French film school. I really didn't know anything at the time, but I knew at least how to take pictures. So I said, I'll try for the image department. And then when I miraculously got into the French film school, I fell in love with working with the camera. You're following what's going to be in the movie. So that immediacy that the camera allows is what I loved from the beginning. I'm Kirsten Johnson, and this is my course about documentary cinematography.
Well, it's interesting because I think about The Girl Who Wants to Study John Stuart Mills.
Yes.
Her bedroom, I guess, when she wakes up, there's like, I think it's her. It's like sort of that, almost like the bluish greeny wall paint with the white on top.
Yeah.
And that's where I sort of noticed, that's when it clicked with me, because I was watching the film, not paying attention to the colors, but to the story. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, wait a second. Usually that would be really punching me in the face or really vibrant and over the top. So it's interesting that you went sort of that way. Like, did you guys, because I think you kind of referenced this, but like in the script, were you pulling things out of that sort of helped guide you towards the look?
Well, as a cinematographer, I really like to absorb locations and in the place where story takes place, and see how we adapt that to the film. And funny that you mentioned that scene, because I think that was one of the last locations we found, and it's a real location. That's one of those that's not actually a set. And we actually walked in and it looked exactly like that. Like that was the exact, like we didn't change that location. We changed the furniture, but we didn't actually change the paint color. And we kind of loved that the color was like that, but we had this idea that we never wanted any color to just kind of overpower. So I feel that that scene was pivotal in kind of deciding the level of saturation for the film,
Mm,
because we wanted to tone down that color, and not just that color, like saying Mexico is very vibrantly painted. So it wasn't just
yeah.
that color, it was a lot of different colors that we were trying to find a muted point. Like, for example, one thing that is unavoidable here are the water tanks on top of buildings, and they're
Yeah.
like electric blue. I mean, so like one of the things we actually did in color correction was go through quite a bit and like desaturate those electric blue tanks, or some of that stuff that was a little bit over the top as far as color. And then the stuff that we had control over, we tried to minimize color wise, kind of naturally, not through color correction, but through production design. But like I was saying, there was a lot of things that we did not have control over. So we did kind of pick this muted uh, palette for the film that we thought suited it best. And like I'm saying, it made it more about the kids and not about all the distracting stuff that's around them. Plus, the world that we're in, that they're in, um, is full of also just a lot of like distracting, like plasticky things that also we have a lot in Mexico, unfortunately. And all those things are also very bright. So, like the even like the color boxes are like bright pink, and like so all this I think was a way to just pull the attention off of that and really put the attention on the characters.
Interesting. Because I also, whenever I think of like locations like Mexico, Texas, or California, I always think of the sun just beating the hell out of the colors and like almost like making them like softer or muted in a sense. So it felt natural. That's why I was thinking with that color shift going from the yellow or the sort of like you said tobacco yellow to this felt more realistic to me when I looked at it because it felt that sort of muted feeling.
I mean, that was, I think the intention was to try and make it look as real. I mean, I would, I don't know. Some people have said, well, it's not really real. It has a definite style, which
Mhm.
I agree. I don't think it's a documentary, but the idea was to create something that was pretty, neutral, I guess, in a way, and again, just not distracting. That I think that was the key to finding that look, and we did create a couple of LUTs
Mhm.
in pre-production, but they were not overly complex. I mean, they really all we did is we did shift everything slightly towards cyan. The film does have a slight
Mhm.
cyan um, feel, and that was just sort of also a way of just unifying things. Um, and but other than that, it's pretty straightforward. Other than the little lack of saturation and slight lack of contrast. Um, but again, it was really trying not to make it overpower the story.
Yeah.
That was really the kind of the ultimate goal of it. Is like, how do we create something that lets the story be the protagonist?
Well, and one last question about the bedroom scene, but it's a tight space by the looks of it. So how did you guys go about lighting that space for with such little room?
Well, I've lived in Mexico for a long time, and I've shot quite a few films here, and you know, a lot of the spaces are small, so you become very adept at working in small spaces. The policy for lighting of the whole film kind of was the same idea that I was talking about the color. It was all about restraint and all about less is more. So in general, I really worked on the lighting being as invisible as possible. Like, I never wanted to feel like there's movie lighting. I
Mm.
never wanted it to feel like, oh, there's look at the eye light, or look at the backlight, or look at the whatever. Like it was really meant to be as invisible. And probably one of the proudest things I am about the lighting of the film is that it is very I think it's very invisible. Like, you don't see the hand of the filmmaker very much, and
Mhm.
that was sort of the intent all along. So most of the lighting was done. I always tried to mix multiple sources, because natural lighting doesn't come from a three-quarter soft bounce light unless you're standing next to a window. So I tried to mix like top light with a little bit of side light, and I always tried to motivate it from, even if it was like a fake lamp that wasn't really there, but I tried to make it like it was coming from where there would be a lamp. So I think almost never did we just arbitrarily put lights where they shouldn't
Mhm.
go. And a lot of stuff was put in the ceiling. I mean, fortunately, the ceilings were pretty high in that space, so we were able to put things. And my gaffer in Mexico is very adept at being able to put things in places where you don't think things could be put. And we use a lot of very lightweight lighting. We use a lot of the stereotubes, and truthfully, very minimally either bounce them into the ceiling. So everything was pretty minimalistic, and we really like avoid having stands and flags. Like
Mhm.
everything was kind of tucked up into different places. Obviously, for that first scene, the one you're talking about, where Lupe is getting out of the house with her brother and sister, for that scene, almost everything came through the windows. And even though that was a real location, we actually sort of turned it into a studio because it had a big patio in the back, and we were able to basically cover up the patio entirely and then just control the light to our taste, because we had night scenes and day scenes, and we actually were shooting all daytime. So we decided to come up with that idea, and we had a rigging crew come in and just basically tent the whole thing, and that way we could just control the lighting and just use it like a stage.
There is one shot that I absolutely love. I think it's a fantastic, like it could be a photograph that you hang on a wall. And it's when, and I can't remember her name, like Paloma or Palomino.
Paloma would be the one that lives in the trash dump.
Yeah, and so we're sitting near her father, and he's sort of silhouetted, and she and the little boy are on the trash heap looking through the telescope.
Oh yeah, yeah, thank you.
So, like, how much, did the director bring to this in terms of like storyboards and looks, and how much did you guys sort of discover on set, and versus how much did you get to come up and bring yourself to.
Well, I mean, I think there's it's always teamwork, and
Mhm.
that's kind of the way I like to work. Chris uh, is incredibly knowledgeable about what he wants. So he's very, very clear about what he wants in the frame and doesn't want. And he's a storyteller that is very much about the details of things,
Mhm.
what things, he tells a story through details. So, I think Chris was very, very clear on what he wanted and didn't want to see in the frame. Other than that, as far as like the composition and things like that, and I think those things were done through teamwork.
Mhm.
Finding stuff. I'd say, "What do you think about this?" And sometimes he'd have feedback, and sometimes he'd like what I was showing him. So I felt it was something that we did together. I mean, in pre-production, we never did storyboards because I think one of the important aspects of the film is that we wanted it to be very energetic and spontaneous.
Mhm.
We didn't want it to be this like bogged down. Like I think we only used a crane like two times in the entire movie, and I don't think we ever used a dolly, or maybe once or twice. No, yeah, I think twice we used a dolly. The rest of the film was all done handheld. So the way we did it is we basically blocked out scenes using a program called Shotmaker, and which is really easy. I really enjoy
Mhm.
that program. And we just basically wrote down where everybody was. So-so's here, so-so's there. They walk, and it wasn't always 100%, but I have to say it was pretty close. Like St. Chris, he really, really understood how he wanted to put these things together.
Mhm.
And then, between me and the operators, I had two operators full time, and then a third operator at many times when we had a lot of the kids, we had a third camera. It was kind of a mix. It was a mix of letting them be spontaneous, because a lot of it, like I'm saying, was about capturing opportunities. Some of these kids had never been in front of a camera before. Some had, but for the most part, they were all pretty new to the filmmaking process. So part of our approach was, how do we become invisible, or as invisible as you can, having three cameras and three focus pullers and a boom guy, and like how invisible can be, how invisible can you be, how unintrusive can you be. So we built the cameras really tiny. We really took we shot it with Alexa Mini LFs, and we really just configured them down to where they had like nothing on them. They didn't even have a matte box. It was the lens, the camera, and then in a backpack there was the transmitters and the rest of the stuff that you need to run the camera. But the operators were working with a really small kit, and I think that kind of helped them integrate. So, like I said, I think it was a mix of things. I don't think there was like one like absolute rule. I think some certain things came from Chris, certain things I think came from me, certain things we discovered on set. I mean, there was a lot of discovery.
Mhm.
So, and we were never super strict. I mean, we had our plan, but we also discovered a lot of stuff as we went.
So one of the things I'm interested in is the perspective that you guys give this from. It's very much from the children's perspective, seeing the teacher and sort of getting this new world, or having their worlds, I guess, opened up. So like, what did you guys do from like a camera position, like handheld, that type of thing, to sort of, I guess, put us in that position or make us feel like we're seeing it from the kid's perspective?
One of the films that inspired us for this approach on how we shot the kids and how we framed them was the movie Ratcatcher, from the Lynn Ramsey movie,
Hmm.
uh, and that film was a really good inspiration of how we dealt with the adults and how we dealt with a lot of the framing of the kids, um, and how we kind of kept this like kid perspective. And I think we obviously had more kids to deal with, and scenes that had only adults. So like saying we couldn't always follow it all the way, but it was kind of our initial guide and our initial inspiration for that.
Now, one of the things you mentioned earlier in our interview was sort of taking the inspiration from Mexico itself and what have you. And I'm wondering, is there a particular photographer or artist in Mexico that you guys sort of turn to in terms of just inspiration in general, or for your own work later on?
Oh, I can't say that we did, honestly. I don't know that. I mean, there's a lot of Mexican cinematographers that I, of course, love and admire, but
Mhm.
I don't know that we used any of that particularly as a guide for this. Um, there's definitely some like journalistic photography that we
Mhm.
saw, especially the area, because we obviously did not shoot it in Matamoros because unfortunately the situation there is not safe enough for us
Yeah.
to go there. So we shot it in Mexico City, and there was some inspiration of things that were published in newspapers and things of, especially for example, the scene where Lupe and Nico are walking back and they cross the police line, and they just kind of ignore these like dead cops and they just kind of walk through like that was like completely normal. So I mean, there was some inspiration in from those things, but I wouldn't say overly.
Now, I have one last question for you. What would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
Um, Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Is it good one? You not the new ones? Not-
I haven't seen the new one,
Okay.
but yeah, no, Raiders of the Lost Ark was like the movie that made me want to make movies.
Yeah.
When I saw that, and it still is. Like I still watch it, and it's like, man, that movie just does not age. Uh, so it's yeah, it's I think
What
one of
about
my favorite
teacher? Who
movies.
is the teacher who got you into it, into things?
Into filmmaking,
Well, into filmmaking, or sort of inspired you the way this teacher does in the show, in the movie?
that's it's gonna be pretty horrible, but I don't remember. I don't know. I grew up in Latin America, and there was like no film. Like it just did not exist when I was a kid. So um, when I moved to the U.S. when I was 19, I had no exposure to film at all. So I don't know. I mean, I knew that I wanted to make films. Like I had this like romance, like,
Hmm.
but it wasn't something that I could have foreseen because I just didn't really like seeing there was just no exposure to it.
Yeah.
Like, I was growing up in Colombia in the 90s, and it was a really treacherous time in Colombia. There was a lot
Hmm.
of narco wars, and so nobody was really thinking about filmmaking. I mean, fortunately, Colombia has blossomed. Like now, it's blossomed.
Hmm.
But when I was a kid, there was nothing. I think I had seen one film camera in my life. I have never even seen like a sound camera. I didn't even know that was a. I didn't even know director photography was even a thing. Like when I first moved to back to the U.S., I didn't even know how it kind of came together. So it's been a very slow process of of discovery for that. Like it took a while. It took watching a lot of movies and realizing that there was a profession there to
Yeah.
storytell with a camera, which is what really made me fall in love with it.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Oh, my pleasure.
And that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com and, of course, on Instagram at filmmaker_u. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching. This video is made possible by our sponsors, AJA. We'd like to thank AJA for all their support and tell you to go to aja.com for all your production and post-production needs.